Hello and welcome to another video from Cyfarthfa Castle Museum and Art Gallery. My name is Christopher Parry and today I'm outside Joseph Parry's cottage, which is a small museum, an ironworkers cottage and an exhibition to the life and times of Joseph Parry upstairs. And basically we at Cyfarthfa Castle run this building as well, and it's been closed for an awful long time due to the COVID pandemic and lots of other things. But today, when you are seeing this video, it marks 180 years since the birth of Joseph Parry back in 1841, and so we thought we'd do a little video in here. And thankfully you were going to get a break from me talking so much, because I'm going to do a little Q&A session with Benjamin Price, our education officer, who knows far more about this cottage and the life of Joseph Parry than I do. And so for once, hopefully I'm going to learn something while you watch along, and yeah, hopefully you enjoy. I'm going to go inside and have a quick chat with Ben. So now we're inside Joseph Parry's cottage and I am with my colleague Ben. Joseph Parry's cottage, first and foremost, who is Joseph Parry on the most basic level and why should we remember him?
So Joseph Parry, probably during his time the most famous Welsh person in the world. From his time here in Merthyr, he would grow up to become a world famous musician and composer.
Brilliant. So where did he predominantly grow up?
So he spent the first part of his life here in Merthyr, and actually right here in this cottage.
And born here?
Born here in 1841 and would spend the first 13 years of his life here.
Fabulous, fabulous. So how was life in the cottage when Joseph Parry, do you know where in the cottage he was born for a start?
So he claims that he was born in the room just next to us here in the front room.
And so how was the house worked? How was it set up? How many people lived here? Who was his father? Who was his mother?
So like most houses here in Merthyr during the 19th century, you are talking about a very small cottage. 2 up, 2 down. That's 2 rooms upstairs, 2 rooms downstairs. This house you could probably fit today maybe 2 or 3 of them into an average home here in Merthyr. So there would have been 12 people living in this house. Joseph Parry's dad, Daniel Parry, his mum, Elizabeth Parry, and then 4 brothers and sisters. But on top of the Parry family as well, you had 5 lodgers living in this house. So this is people who are living in your home, in some cases strangers to your family, but are paying your family a little bit of rent to stay in your house.
And was that commonplace for Merthyr?
Yeah, it was quite common really. Particularly there's new people arriving in Merthyr every single day of the year looking for the same employment opportunities that brought Daniel and Elizabeth Parry from West Wales to Merthyr Tydfil in the first place.
Right.
So they had made that journey and were bringing people into their home, making similar journeys to themselves.
So they came over from Pembrokeshire, settled in Merthyr, attracted by the work, but then there's this moving workforce that basically comes in and out of the town, might not live in Merthyr, might lodge in Merthyr, might lodge outside, but there's literally thousands of people coming in and out. So when we look at the statistics for people living in Merthyr, they're not strictly accurate. It's probably much higher because there's people coming in every day and going out every day.
That's it. You're talking the first town in Wales in that sense. So it's people being brought here from all around Wales, from the rural agricultural communities surrounding Merthyr, but then later from further afield as well, but being drawn by those employment opportunities. But that doesn't mean they stay here. They move in further afield and into the more kind of diversifying industrial network of coal mines, ironstone mines, limestone quarries, and ironworks running right across the heads of the valleys.
Amazing. And so with Joseph Parry, when he was growing up in Merthyr, did he ever speak about why music attracted him, or was there any family connections to music in West Wales or in Merthyr or anything like that?
Joseph Parry is a perfect example of someone who's a product of 19th century Merthyr. He is surrounded by the culture, the society, and the industry that was bringing people here in the first place. So he would have grown up hearing the sounds of the Cyfarthfa band, taking part in the countless Eisteddfod that were being held within the chapel network of Merthyr Tydfil. So music was a big part of his childhood and a big part of his life. But aside from that, being this product of this industrial environment, meeting new people, gaining new ideas, hearing the roar of the blast furnaces or the sound of the shingling hammers, this was all part of the experience of Joseph Parry when he grew up here in Merthyr.
Amazing. And wasn't his mother something to do with Bethesda in some way? I can't seem to remember.
That's right. So she was a housekeeper at the Minster of Bethesda. So again, a real strong relationship with the chapel culture of Merthyr.
And hearing music in the chapels all the time.
Yeah, so from a young boy, he was an alto boy at the local chapel. So being, again, almost given that formal education within music, pure in Merthyr.
Amazing. And so you mentioned his father, who was Daniel, and so what did Daniel do then?
So Daniel is listed on one of the census returns as a refiner, and this gives us a little bit of hint to the Parry's life overall, really, and it explains why they're in this cottage. So Chapel Row, the 5 cottages here at Chapel Row, were given towards the skilled workers of the Cyfarthfa ironworks.
So these were high paid accommodation,
These are higher paid accommodation. There's a front door, there's a back door, a front garden, a back garden, and compared to some of the living quarters here in Merthyr, would have been a much pleasanter environment.
And is this part of the reason why they still survive today? Because they were well built, well constructed, spacious, usable houses in comparison to, you know, what called cellars or one-room houses or huts?
This is it. So 19th century Merthyr, the population grows so quickly that the town and its resources are stretched to their truest really at that time. So you see housing being built at various standards. So a house like this, built more directly with one of the ironwork companies, you're going to see a better quality housing, particularly if you're going to train your refiners, your skilled workers from 12, 13 years old into adulthood. You want to make sure that they continue to work with you. So giving them better standards of housing, better pay, keeps them with that company.
Amazing.
But then you see in other areas, other districts of Merthyr being built by perhaps more private speculators looking to build low quality housing as fast, as cheap as possible, and then get people in there.
So you just get a mess of housing because everyone's let a little bit of land on, and you get totally different quality of housing, basically on the same street in many cases, isn't it?
Yeah.
All over the place. Well, why then is Joseph Parry leaving Merthyr? Because there's a famous book by the famous Merthyr author Jack Jones called Off to Philadelphia in the Morning, which charts the kind of slightly fictionalised in his book account of Joseph Parry going. Why did that move happen, and how old was Joseph when they left?
So he's around 13 when the family left Merthyr Tydfil, and like many other people from Merthyr at that time, Daniel Parry is making a decision to take the skills and the expertise that he's gained here in Merthyr through his employment within the ironworks of Merthyr Tydfil and chance his arm almost at going somewhere new and taking those skills and expertise with him to develop a new industry somewhere else. And like many other people from Merthyr, made a journey across the Atlantic to Pennsylvania, and in the case of the Parry family, to a place called Danville. So in Danville, this town in Pennsylvania, he takes employment at the brilliantly named Rough and Ready Rolling Mill. So within 1 year of Daniel moving across, he has saved up enough not just to purchase his first home, but to send for the rest of the Parry family to join him.
So all the family stayed here for a year without their father. So
Yeah.
how would they survive then on that interim, in financial wise?
So by this time, the children of the house are in employment for.
Right.
So from around 9 years old, Joseph Parry has gained employment at the Puth Robbins pit here in Merthyr.
Which is up on the mountainside of Land.
Yeah, just from there. And he says from 11 years old, he was actually taken as a puddler's apprentice at the Cyfarthfa works, so following a similar line to his father of skilled employment.
Very high-end job, puddler,
Yeah.
obviously, and to be a puddler's assistant, again, you're being paid better than a general labourer would in most cases, really.
That's it.
So the kids were basically subsidising while their father finished that kind of almost punt out
Yes.
in America, and then they left, and then the family's life changed, and Joseph's life in particular changed.
Yeah, and what's kind of unique about that is that Daniel Parry obviously isn't alone in leaving Merthyr Tydfil. So there's very much a continuation of Welsh culture and Welsh identity and the things that come with that as well. Music being a big part of that. So when Joseph Parry and the rest of his family moved to Danville, they continue in these same traditions that were happening here in Merthyr Tydfil. So regular musical competitions in the form of Eisteddfod. They maintain this chapel culture and Welsh identity as part of that. And so he continues this musical tradition from his roots here in Merthyr Tydfil to a more formalised approach when he gets to America.
Well, that's the bit, is that having an interest in music and having a connection to music is alright, but then how did he make that jump from being a miner, a puddler's assistant, an iron worker, to being Professor Joseph Parry? How did that transition work?
So they actually run in tandem for the next 10, 11 years of his life. So he works at the Rough and Ready Rolling Mill, but in his spare time he's practicing music. He gains a music tutor who formally teaches him things of harmony and composition. And it's during this time as well he begins to learn musical instruments as well, which will dictate the rest of his life. So while entering competitions in America, he begins then to submit entries back to Wales for the National Eisteddfod. So parts of his own compositions are being sent back to Wales, and he is very successful within 3 Eisteddfods here.
But was he here for them, or did he just send the work back and then it got judged and he was told out in America, or was he physically here?
Yeah, so that's what happens in the first number that he enters. But then he's eventually invited to come back to Wales to submit an entry. He sends the entry ahead of him, but when he arrives here in Wales, he finds that entry has been lost somewhere in transit across the Atlantic. Whilst disappointed with this, he is applauded then for his musical ability and the fact that he is now very much a developing talent within music here in Wales. And so they invite him to join the Gorsedd at the Eisteddfod.
There must have been a point where he didn't go back and he stayed, and then did he have wife and kids, and was he married, or did that all happen when he came back? Or
yes, so he's actually settled in Danville by this point. So this visit back to Wales is very much that. It's a visit back to Wales. So he returns back to America. So then he's invited back to Britain to study music at the Royal Academy of Music in London, and he spends 3 years studying music back here in Britain before then returning to Danville with aspirations of opening his own music school in Danville, which he begins to set up. But it's at this time he's then invited back to Wales to become Professor of Music at the newly formed Aberystwyth University. And during his time at Aberystwyth, he very much throws himself back into composition. So whilst teaching music to the students there, he is also developing his own compositions, including the first grand opera in Wales called Blodwen, that he uses his students to help inform the music and as performers within that.
And when you say writing music, because I know a lot of people will recognise kind of Mafanwy and Blodwen and other things like that, lyrically he never wrote lyrics, it was music composition strictly. So any lyrics added later have been other people's interpretation or inspiration.
Definitely. His time at Aberystwyth University was marred by the fact that he was later let go by the authorities at the museum for spending far too much time composing and not enough time teaching. But one of the big marked changes that he made at Aberystwyth was that he was instrumental in allowing female students to be admitted to the college for the first time in history.
So the first time in history he spearheaded that.
And he was instrumental in that.
Did he ever spend much time in Merthyr when he came back to Wales, or was predominantly his youth spent here and then he was off spending time in Danville and around Wales essentially?
Yeah, it seems so. So after leaving Merthyr, Danville, but then obviously time at Aberystwyth University, at Swansea and later Cardiff. But for Joseph Parry, Merthyr, he sees, as I said earlier, very much himself as a product of Merthyr, and he never forgets this. During his early submittals to the National Eisteddfod of Wales, he calls himself a Merthyr boy forever and ever. So he spends much of his later life back here in Wales. So as I said, teaching at Aberystwyth, then teaching at Swansea, but then his later career teaching at Cardiff University, again as Professor of Music, Dr. Joseph Parry.
And touring the country, I'm guessing.
And touring the country with his compositions.
Obviously that's a major thing that we haven't touched upon really, which we probably haven't got time for, but he certainly toured the country with the best musical artists in the country at the time, and Britain overall really.
And that's it, and we are talking the most famous Welsh person of his day really.
Yeah.
But he dies unexpectedly in 1903. His son had died shortly before him, and seemingly never really recovers from this, and dies in 1903.
And where is he best buried?
So he was living in Penarth by this point, and he's buried in Penarth.
Buried in Penarth. So what happened to this building then after? How are we at Cyfarthfa Castle Museum now in your, what happened to this building in the aftermath?
So like the other houses in the street, this has been occupied with families since the Parry family lived here as well. But in the 1970s, like other areas of Merthyr Tydfil, this house and the other houses in the street were listed for demolition as part of removing a lot of the 19th century buildings here in Merthyr. But fortunately for us as Museum Service now, a newly formed organisation came together to save this incredible building, and not just preserving the story of Joseph Parry, but preserving one of the homes of the iron workers living here in Merthyr Tydfil. For us, as a museum service, what better way to look in at 19th century Merthyr than the home of an ironmaster and the home of an iron worker.
And so yeah, I got nothing more to ask you, and I hope you guys at home have enjoyed this little Q&A session with Ben, and I hope you found out a bit more about Joseph Parry, the cottage here, and why he was in his day the most famous Welshman in Britain really, and arguably the world at one point. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Hwyl fawr.